For Krima Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. Ahmad Dengo joins me to discuss his book titled Dikeledi, Child of Tears, No More. Ahmad, can you tell us what this book is about and why did you decide to write it?
Well, essentially, this is the story of a family who lived through apartheid, endured it, overcame it, and then post 1991, 92, when the supposed miracle was unfolding, they encountered all other kinds of challenges. And it's a story of how particularly the women in that family coped not only with what apartheid imposed on them, what was patriarchy and the way they were brought up traditionally, how that also impacted on them, and how these women, in a sense, liberated themselves, their families, and hopefully in the future their communities.
Does it have a specific target audience?
Well, I don't think I've got a specific target audience for any of my writing, but I hope that the younger people will read this. Because when you open the book, there's this young woman sitting, of course, in New York, who starts talking about Dikeledi and, what Dikeledi means tears, but she's no longer a child of tears. And I think for young people, there will be a resonance about how young people cope not only with the heritage of the past, but with the challenges of the future and with traditions.
We have had a lot of stories based on apartheid. What is your book different from the other books?
This book doesn't only deal with apartheid. It deals with the time frame that led up to apartheid. And yes, it deals with some of the things that did happen in apartheid, but it also deals with traditions and practices that were within local people that apartheid didn't implant, that apartheid in fact took advantage of. For example, the tribal divisions, where you had people who were isiZulu and isiSotho not agreeing with each other. And I remember growing up in Nuclear where there were a lot of isiSotho people. They called them Russians. They wore those fur blankets, and how the Tswana neighbors hated them. How they used to argue, and when the Zulu people walked through there were always fights, and we didn't understand it. And I also think if you look at the other communities, even within the so-called Indian community, Hindu and Muslim people divided and fighting against each other, coloureds, those who spoke English, those who spoke Afrikaans, the animosity. So I think there were a lot of things in there that apartheid took advantage of by enforcing those things. This book intends to look at how people reacted to apartheid, how they overcame it, how they resisted it, and how they endured it, but also how their own backgrounds and upbringing affected their humanity. And subsequently, after that, it is still a challenge that we face, that I think we will not overcome the heritage and the legacy of apartheid unless we overcome our own internal differences that we have as South Africans. Yeah.
Is it safe to say that this book will resonate more with women?
Well, I think it will resonate with women, but I hope it will also appeal to the mindset of males. Because, I know coming from a male person, it sounds strange, but I think there is still in this country a perception or a feeling that, men have more rights natural rights than women, and whether it is economically, politically, socially, and so forth. And I think men too should understand that patriarchy is actually going to tear our society apart. And I hope it will resonate with men too. I'm sure, let them ask questions, why do the women change their names in order to accommodate their own minds? Hi, there's a woman there who goes from Julia to Baile. Then when she has to go back to her original family, she changes the name back to Baile, to Julia. But in her mind, she's always Baile, because the Baile was the person that liberated herself from not only apartheid, but from the traditions as well.
Do you think that our country is doing enough to empower women?
Well, I don't know if there's any government anywhere in the world that's doing enough. And it's not enough just to have rights entrenched and enshrined in the Constitution. And I know this might sound like I'm picking on certain people, but if you go to just consider the traditional leaders, there's not one woman traditional leader in this country, is there? It's all, and if you go to KwaZulu-Natal or even Eastern Cape, I have a memory of traveling with Madiba. I was the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and we went to the Eastern Cape, to Mthatha, to his home, and there came all these traditional leaders, and the king as well. And suddenly, Gracia Machel, who was next to him, one of the people started pushing her back. And Madiba was angry, said, "What are you doing?" With that voice of his. And they were speaking in closer to each other, so I didn't understand. And then he pulled Gracia next to him. And afterwards I asked what was going on. No, the king was saying the woman must go behind. She can't walk next to the man. And there was Madiba who confronted them and said, no, she's my wife. She comes right next to me here. And when you think not only about that tradition, but if you think about some of the Muslim traditions, where under tradition, whether it's Muslim or I don't know if it's in anywhere in the Quran, anything like that, where a man has the right to say to a woman, "I divorce you 3 times, talak, talak, talak," and he can just leave her and marry again. I mean, that is so unjust. So I think what needs to happen is the education system also needs to address this. What children read in school, how they are taught, and how they are taught to understand humanity. I think that too is very, very important, because you can write what you want to in a constitution, but if children grow up not understanding that, they just be indifferent to it.
Can you also tell us about the incident in a book where Dikeledi was shot in an apparent botched hijacking?
Well, the story is essentially not only one of her hijacking, but what was behind the hijacking. She's an investigative journalist in the US, and then she comes and she continues it here. In South Africa, she begins to uncover corruption within the South African police force. And there's a guy who's giving her information. And as she drives to Mahikeng, he phones her to warn her, "Look, they know about me. You better get away because they're going to find you." And she has got these things in her computer. And then when she gets this warning, early hours of the morning, she reads her father's paper and she decides to leave. And as she pulls out, this is when the so-called hijacking takes place. But as you will see later on in the case, they didn't want anything else. They went straight for her computer. What they were after was the information that she had. And they would have killed her if her aunt, the older Dikeledi, didn't come and knock that guy down. And so the hijacking was really the beginning of a longer part of the story about how the collusion between corrupt crooks in the SA police force, this illusioned former freedom fighters and apartheid security police people who came together. Now, I know the government will dispute this and say, give me the proof. I haven't got any positive proof. It is just things that I've read over the years, you know, that makes me think. Why, for example, wouldn't they allow access to the security documents for years and years and years? Were they afraid that the people who informers their names are going to be released, or the collusion between the security operatives and other people? But so the story unfolds where in the end that corrupt crook, the head himself, gets killed by some of the people. But the good people in there, and again led by a woman, decides that they will investigate it and overcome it, and that's when they persuade the young Dikeledi to go back to New York for a while for her to be safe.
Ahmad, you said Dikeledi was born in the US. Do we have a lot of such families because of the people who went to exile?
Well, I don't know if we have a lot of families, but remember, a lot of the people who went into exiles married people or men and women from where they lived, you know, where they settled down. And Pizzo, her father, settled in New York, and he taught at the City College in Harlem, and this is where he met another lecturer. They fell in love, and, you know, as she describes it, one thing led to another. Yeah, I come, see results, you know. So I don't think it's a big one, but for me, it was a way of showing how global the world is, and how we have artificial divides by race, tradition, and nationality. You know, so two people meet. My wife is Scottish. I mean, I met my wife when I was working at the Kagiso Trust. I went to Scotland to do some work there. I met my wife. She's been here now for 27 years. You know, she moved to South Africa. You know.
Our country is grappling with the issue of racism and color. How do you think this can be resolved?
Well, you know, 300 years of history and heritage you don't overcome overnight. Well, let me give you an anecdote. 1992, I took a break from all the activism, and I accepted 6 months, a position for 6 months at City College in Harlem. That's how I knew Harlem, as a professor, visiting professor. And I taught literature there. And there was one class was for adult students. And remember, this was 1992, the unfolding negotiations, Madiba, and I always started off maybe the first 2 lessons waxing lyrical about what this means. And a woman from Brazil raised her hand. She said, "Excuse me, Professor, I find this very boring. Let me tell you," I'll try and quote her words. He says, "We threw the Portuguese out 300 years ago, and we still haven't achieved what you're talking about." She said, "There's still poverty, inequality. Indigenous people are still marginalized. Our government is still grappling with a lot of problems. Don't think you are going to overcome all the things you face and the things you are talking about overnight. You better have a long-term plan." And you know, I always remember that, because we do need a long-term plan. We need to think in 20 or 30 years from now, how will this country look? And that means investing in young people, investing in education. If I had dictatorship rights, no, there shouldn't be any dictator. Well, I'll tell you what I do. I'd make sure no government minister drives a Mercedes. They would all drive small little cars that's not going to what? Cheap. And the money that's saved is invested in schools everywhere.
Dikeledi sounded like a very powerful woman. Do you think that we need a lot of those in our country?
Well, yes, we need them in politics, but we also need them in civil society. We need them to lead communities as well. Because I think the changes that are going to come about in this country are going to start at community level. from a positive aspect. And it's not just when you were angry, you didn't get services, go and burn down something. No, let's find an alternative. The schools are dysfunctional. Let the parents look at the schools and help. Because, I mean, when you think about it, think about those teachers. Overworked, underpaid. There's always shortage of services, overcrowded. Those poor teachers, they must be going crazy, like the health system. Imagine being a doctor or a nurse in one of the public hospitals. They must be so stressed. And this is where communities can help. And I went to university asking myself, where am I going to get a job? And only later I thought to myself, why didn't I ask myself, how can I create jobs? And this is what young people need to do. Not ask who's going to do something for me, but what can I do as well?
Is there another book coming out?
Yes, we do, but it will be about a year and a half before I finish it, because I think that will probably be my most difficult book.
Yes.
It is about childhood. It's called Just Imagine. I started writing it as an autobiography. I'm not going to do it as an autobiography. It describes the growing up of a young person who loves books more than he loves sports, and he falls out and disagrees with his grandparents who want him to be more religious and sanctimonious, and which he isn't. Instead of praying or reading the Bible or the Quran, he reads books, especially adult books that he has gotten from his uncle. And then his father gives his grandmother gives his father a choice, him or me, in his granny's house. So he moves out and goes to live with his uncle. And his uncle is a Muslim man, let's call him Abi, and he's living with a Jewish man whose name is Bert. And they are two gay men. So can you imagine in those apartheid days, a non-white gay man and a white Jewish gay man, and this young kid growing up with them in the city center, and the things they experienced. So this is really the story about how those two adults transcended all the color divisions, how this young child grew up understanding the differences as well. But there are tragic endings to it.
That was Ahmad Dengo speaking to Krima Media's Polity about his new book titled Dikeledi, Child of Tears No More.